So good morning, all, and welcome to another fun-filled, action-packed adventure going through Age of the Patriarchs and all that stuff. But before we even get to the book of Genesis, from our devotional, Judges 15, Brother Clay had a question on Samson and all that.
You may have answered this before in the past, I don't recall it. Why is it called Judges? Why are they, like Samson, who went on to judge, he's a judge, in terms that we think, or I think of a judge, in other references in the Bible, there's rulers, there's Pharaoh, there's leaders, there's kings, but what and priests? Why is it called Judges?
That is an awesome question that has not been addressed yet. So I'm very, very glad you asked that. Question is, why is the book called Judges? Why are these people called judges when we're used to kings and rulers and even priests and all that? Why is it called Judges? Because here's the beautiful thing about how the Lord sets things up. What he expects of his rulers is to be judges. What does a judge do? A judge makes a ruling, a determination. A judge decides based on criteria. This is okay, this is not. So God wanted his leaders not to be kings. He said, like when they were asking for a king through Samuel, he said, you've already got a king. Gideon as judge, they wanted to make him king. He said, no, we've already got a king. His son Abimelech said, yeah, I'll take that. And it didn't go very well. So it was very intentional. Then, in fact, those who would help Moses, when his father-in-law said, this is too much for you to do on your own, he said, appoint judges. People who would be over different groups of people, different numbers of people, and then kind of chain of command, let them handle the little things. If they can handle it, escalate, and bring it up to you if no one else can. But the whole point of judges and not kings or rulers or in that circumstance is because it was very intentional of God, my conviction, that the role of this leadership position be a role of declaring what is right in the sight of God. And that it be judging and determining and evaluating where is God in this picture, who's in keeping with God, who's not. Very famous first case, one of the first cases that came before King Solomon was the women and the baby, where two women were living together and both had babies, and basically one died, and the mom of the one who died swapped the babies. The one mom woke up and said, that ain't my kid. So they're both saying the living kid is theirs. They come to Solomon, and Solomon says, she said, how do I know? And Solomon had to determine where God was in this picture. So what did Solomon do? He said, give me a sword. Let's cut the baby in half. You can each have half. And one mom says, yeah, that's right. The other mom says, no, give her the whole baby. Solomon says, that's the mom. So in Solomon's wisdom, he judged who was being of God, who was having true high regard for God-given life. And so even in the title of king, Solomon was still judging what was of God. So it was very, very intentional for God's people. Remember, this is supposed to be as close to heaven as they get now. They're out from bondage. They are in the promised land. They're all set up. They've conquered as what they're supposed to conquer. Well, not all of it, but so they're established, they're home. This is supposed to be paradise now, as close as they can in their sin-affected state. They're not supposed to have one king. They're not supposed to have governments like the lands around them. They're supposed to be living the godly life. Everything that the 5 books of Moses were preparing them for, they were now to be living and enjoying and thriving in. And it was to be God-led with leaders who would lead by judging and determining and presenting, providing what is right in the sight of God for them to do. So long answer, but very, very important question. I'm really glad you asked that. Does that kind of help with the perspective on that?
And second, why did Samson allow himself to be down, not knowing what the outcome?
Because I believe we're not told specifically in the Bible, why did Samson allow himself to be tied and led? I believe it's because Samson knew his strength, just like he lied to Delilah 3 times before he finally told her what the truth was of his strength. He knew what his strength was. I don't believe that in that instant he needed God to melt the ropes, because I think Samson could have just busted them. It's like one of my favorite scenes in the Man of Steel movie. Superman's turned himself into the authorities, and he's sitting there in the interrogation room with Lois Lane talking to him. They're across the table. She looks You let them put handcuffs on you? And he said, that makes him feel better.
Yeah.
Then they ask him questions, he just gets up and busts them off and starts talking to them. But yeah, I think Samson allowed, to answer your question, why did Samson allow it? I think because it was of no consequence to Samson. He knew he could bust out any time. And he may not have known the details of what God was doing, God bless you, but he knew his God-given strength through his Nazarite vow and all that stuff, and what the angel had told his parents before he was born and all that stuff. So did he kind of lose sight of that later on? Yeah. Did that kind of go to his head? Yeah, literally, but yeah. Lose his sight. Great stuff. Great stuff. I love this group. Okay, cool. So yeah, great questions there. Anything else on Judges 15? Good stuff in there. And that brings us to Genesis 47. We are finally, thank you for your patience. We are finally moving on and forward into some stuff. So, age of the patriarchs. Patriarchs are referred to as the time frame of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the 12 sons, including Joseph and Judah. So we are at the point. Jacob's whole family is now in Egypt. We talked about Joseph and the world's first alphabet being based on those hieroglyphs. And I love the example that was shown in the film, Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy, where they see here's the Egyptian hieroglyph for water, and it's waves, like waves of water. Well, in Hebrew, the word for water is mayim, mayim. So the Hebrew letter begins that wavy line. It's where we get our letter M. It comes from the Hebrew word mayim, which comes from the hieroglyph. That symbol, the wavy hieroglyph for water, is where we get our letter M.
I always think they're stretching it because water don't start with them.
In English, you're right. But doesn't everything start with us?
Yeah, no.
What do you mean Paul didn't use the King James Bible? Right? Hilarious stuff. So God in his grace and timing and wisdom allowed this to happen so that, because remember with the hieroglyphs, only the highly educated and upper ups could understand it, or because there were thousands of hieroglyphs. There were pictures, there were images. So because the Lord would want his word through Moses to be understood by every man, woman, and child, this is the perfect timing for, out of nowhere else and no time else, no place else, right here and now, for the birth of the alphabet, to where every man, woman, and child could understand this and understand words, and his word could be given. Not only would this help them in surviving in Egypt, because they weren't going to be able to understand all them hieroglyphs, but Joseph, being the middleman between Egypt and the people, would be able to bridge that gap, present the alphabet, and and again, when they leave Egypt in the Exodus, they take the alphabet with them. It's no longer found in Egypt. It disappears because it's for these people. It was these people. In fact, Josephus even says that Moses had the alphabet, and he's the one who brought it to the Phoenicians and on from there and all that. Sister Peggy.
The alphabet and everything. Was it in the same time frame of the Tower of Babel? When
No.
everybody was dispersed?
And actually, we touched on that in last week's Sunday class. What happened was the time of the alphabet was in the, according to the David Roll timeline, which I think is accurate with scripture that never has to change. We're talking in the 1660s BC that Jacob and everyone comes here. The Tower of Babel was in the 2500s BC, much earlier. But what's very, very important about that, and we refreshed a little bit of it last week, when Nimrod, outside the Bible, he's known as Enmer. Remember, they didn't write vowels back then. Enmer the hunter, Nimrod the hunter. When he was king of Uruk, which in our Bibles is Erech, E-R-E-C-H. Erech is the first city the Bible mentions. And this is the answer to the question. This is because there's a Tower of Babel connection here. Y'all understand? Do y'all understand that the Bible is the Lord of the Rings?
So I will.
This is the answer. This is understand.
Sister Ashley,
No,
we have Alexa. You have her.
Well, what I need to do is give the short answer and then give the long answer.
You're absolutely right. And we can choose that one.
Yeah, exactly. Bingo, you get it. Short answer is writing was invented by Nimrod. The alphabet was invented by Joseph. Yeah, writing that at the time of Nimrod did not have an alphabet. it was icons, it was images, pictographs, all these different things. So how did that come about? Well, in the 2500s BC, Nimrod was the king of Uruk, which itself was named for Adam's grandson, Enoch. Cain named it, built that city, named it for Enoch before the flood. And so after the flood, they came and rebuilt the cities. They knew where they were. And so Uruk was rebuilt. Cush was the first king of Uruk. He went on to Africa, Cush and all that stuff, when his son Nimrod was in charge, stayed behind as king of Uruk. So when he was building two main buildings in this very famous age in Sumer, this phase of Uruk City 4 and all that stuff, he's building a temple in Uruk to Ishtar, Inanna, and Aphrodite and all those later things she'll be called, Isis and all that. He's building a temple to her in Uruk, and over in Eridu, he's building the Tower of Babel. Now, Eridu was actually the first city ever built. Enoch built it for his son Irad. And it's not the first one mentioned in the Bible, but it's the first one built. First city in the world. We have, actually, as we dig down below the flood, we see Enoch, Adam's grandson, we see the first temple that he built. False temple to a false god. So we see that. And as we dig down, there are 17 layers of temples being built and built and built until number 1 at the top is the Tower of Babel. The number 17 down below is actually the first one with Enoch. And so Nimrod is building these two things, Tower of Babel and the temple to Inanna in Uruk. Well, in the Persian Gulf they're in swampland. So not a lot of trees, not a lot of metals. So what he does is he reaches back to where they came from, the mountains of Eden, mountains of what's known as Arada in Iran. He reaches out to the king over there and says, hey, we need your stuff. We need your minerals. We need your jewels. We need to, and the king's not too thrilled about this. So he's sending his messenger back and forth. It's a few months journey back and forth. And finally, the messengers become so long-winded, the messenger can't remember it. Nimrod grabs some clay and starts marking some symbols, and it says here, and that's the first writing. It's recognized worldwide that Uruk is the birth of writing. But that's the story of it.
He couldn't remember, so he had to carry around a £100 tablet.
Not that tablet. No.
I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Paper did that.
No papyrus. And so writing begins. We have these iconographs. In fact, this is where hieroglyphs come from. The people in Egypt didn't come from Egypt. They came from Noah, Noah's grandson, Mizraim. Egypt is named for Mizraim. They don't call themselves Egyptians. They say, I'm Al-Mazri, I'm from Mizraim. Mizraim, Nimrod's uncle, brother of Cush, they all came to Africa. Cush was in the South Sudan, Ethiopia, which was referred to as Cush. His brother Mizraim went up to Egypt. And it was taking this writing from Nimrod, these images, these icons, and that's where hieroglyphs developed from. Actually, I showed a slide last week that had been in my PowerPoint back then. Now I'm on Google Earth, where it showed, okay, here's a clay tablet from Mesopotamia showing their images, and then put around it, they showed what the Egyptian hieroglyphs were and how similar they were, showing that the Egyptian hieroglyphs came from Mesopotamia. So Joseph learned the Egyptian hieroglyphs that came from Mesopotamia, that came originally from what Nimrod invented. And through God's wisdom, he was able to take that and break it down and make an alphabet that the Hebrews could understand. So we're like 900 years since the Tower of Babel. And so, yeah, so that's definitely connected. And yeah, Sister Ashley.
I guess it makes sense. I mean, obviously they had language.
Yes.
So, yeah, so if I want to trade, right, if I want to trade with you, like you were saying, they needed all these things. It makes sense that to start with something, they would draw pictures or symbols so there could be a connection.
Yes.
And then I could see where it would like bounce off from that.
Yes.
Okay, you know, so this here comes this little guy, he wants an apple or whatever, he wants fruit. Okay, well, he's showing, I know that this symbol is going to stand for fruit. Hey, this is a good idea. So, you know, let's build upon this, and then we have a way to connect all these different places, right? With for the very practical resources and trade and stuff. So thinking about it like that,
absolutely.
It's kind of like how you had told me once that most other countries, people in other countries, they learn English because English is how we trade. This is how, you know, I mean, we don't grow up and learn Russian, right? But no, Russians learn English. English has kind of become kind of the standard for the business world and things like this. How difficult is it for us to learn Japanese and, and all these other languages? But yet, how many foreigners do you see that it's just that they're multilingual, and it's because of these practical, who is it, the YouTuber we watched, this guy, little guy we watch play video games, he speaks 5 different, he's from Chile, he speaks 5 different languages like that, because he's an engineer, he was taught these things, so that makes sense, that there needed to be some sort of way to communicate.
Yeah. So 2 quick things off of that. I'm really glad you said that. So the moral of those stories, the lessons to learn from all of that is, 1, God has blessed America to where the whole world is learning English and the dollar is the currency and all that stuff. God has blessed America, number 1. Number 2, America's gotten dumb.
Yeah.
What?
America has gotten dumb.
Yeah.
And where the rest of the world has not.
And that's why it's so important to watch what our dollar does. The devaluation of our dollar is a big thing. But
Yeah. And so we see this is people coming off the ark, descendants of Noah, of course, descendant of Adam before that. But here are Noah's descendants spreading from the Tower of Babel, going into the different pockets, having the different societies. But then as that initial oneness was dispersed, there's still this desire to connect and outreach. And now we have globalism today, a different kind of Tower of Babel. But we see, yes, I'm getting there. And so we see that there is a desire within us to reach, to connect. And when it's done according to God in his ways, it's a beautiful thing and it's a godly thing. But when it's done apart from God, like clearly the Tower of Babel was, clearly the globalist movement is anti-God. And so we see that's where the problem lies. And so for the clay.
In the beginning. No.
5209 BC.
Or you were talking about the webphone, they had to have language, they had to use, a human is born. And what if it's born in complete silence? Nobody speaks, what is that child? It's not gonna have a language.
Right.
It's gonna, so I think that even back when they started training, it was probably more sign language.
Absolutely.
That I'll take 2 of those. Type of thing, so that's where, when you say your mind goes, that's when mine goes, well, it starts somewhere. The first person to speak had to mimic somebody else speaking.
Well, remember, the first person to speak was Adam, who spoke with God.
Okay, okay. So Adam spoke to God.
And Eve.
And, okay. And then start, okay.
So even language itself was a gift from God.
There, that man.
he named the animals. God
Yeah.
named the animals, right?
Yeah. But to your point about the sign language, even in conflicts and negotiations, Alyssa will get this one. That's from the Puss in Boots movie. You don't break me, I break you. Another story for another time. But yeah, so interaction, communication has always been there. It's just a matter of what form it's taken. And where's God been in the picture? And so we didn't start out as, Ashley hates this phrase when I use it, booga booga cavemen. I'm not being racist against cavemen. That's not a race. There's only one race anyway. Anyway, yeah.
Marriage. I didn't need to see that.
Yeah. My point is, they weren't. There never was a dumb caveman who couldn't talk. We were created intelligent. Did we live in caves? Of course, because that's an intelligent thing to do. Did we write on the caves? Yes, because that was expression and communication, not a dumb thing to do. But we weren't the dumb cavemen you see in movies.
Right.
Never, never, never.
Yeah.
And so Exactly, exactly. Now, knowledge is based on knowledge that's been established in prior generations. We build upon that in societies, but the intelligence is always there. The God-given abilities are always there. It's just what we do with it. Yeah,
You know, and everything that they did with the cars. and
Yeah.
everything.
but notice they talk functionally.
They did.
Yeah. Even if they named a kid Bam Bam. You know. So yeah, so fun stuff. But that brings us to Joseph and the Israelites in Egypt at this time in 1661 BC. And so here we are in what's known as the Middle Bronze Age, level 2A, that phase. So we've got in the world at this time, we've got China, first dynasty, about to fall apart. And we're actually going to see about getting to that here pretty quick, fairly quick. We'll see. 36. Let's see. China over here, they've hopped around capitals a bit. There's South Korea, North Korea, there's the Chinese mainland. So over here in this area is where the capital currently is, and it's going to get moved again. So that's so it's the Xia Empire, the Xia Dynasty, first dynasty in China.
Eric,
Yes.
is China open to tourism and stuff, even though they're
Yes.
communist?
Communist government trying to get the benefits of capitalist trade.
Like Russia, you can go to Russia too.
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Certainly not North Korea. Yeah. Yeah, North Korea is closed for business, and you see the results of that. Oh yeah. My boss, who's from Singapore and is of Chinese descent, she's gone to China and visited
Okay.
family and all that stuff. My other coworker, Albert, whose family's from Taiwan, he's been and visited and all
But
that
you don't
stuff.
have to worry about it's not dangerous or anything, right?
There's stuff I would love to see there. But yeah, there are concerns just in modern society in the way of things. I would be worried just because of the state of the government and all that, accusations of spying and all that stuff, and incarceration and those kind of things.
Oh, yeah,
They pretty much follow the spy,
and grabbing them.
Yeah.
do whatever they want.
Yeah,
in-
yeah. So Emperor Xi is the last emperor of the Xia dynasty, pretty much led to its downfall, and that will be coming up. We'll see what dynasty replaces the Xia dynasty as we go. But closer to home for the Bible folks and the patriarchs, we've got in Egypt, in their second high point, the Middle Kingdom, we've got Father Senuseret III as Pharaoh, who has brought his son to reign with him and learn the ropes and get ready to transition over. And that son of Senuseret III is Amenemhat III, Pharaoh of the Bible in Joseph's time, the one who had the dreams, the one who promoted Joseph, all that jazz. The one who conversed with Jacob earlier in chapter 47 of Genesis. This is the guy. So over in Sumer, Shinar, as the Bible calls it, land of Mesopotamia, where they had all come out of, we have in the north early days of Assyria, and I did come upon this, let's see. Their early days currently looks to be in their old kingdom, a ruler named Sargon the First. And I found this impressive work of art here. So this is apparently the god Ashur, and this is Sargon being taken to him and presented to him. So this is potentially from the time of Jacob and everyone in Egypt. So if you ever wonder what Sargon the First looks like, how accurate that is, I could not say, or how close to. Yeah.
So that picture, you said the guy there in the seat is the god.
Yep, Ashur.
So they saw him, or do you know? I mean, because
he doesn't exist.
Well, I know that, but they drew him. So figment of their imagination.
Short answer, yes. They're presenting their king to be accepted by the god.
Because you would think if it's
a coronation.
Then it's a written record, though, of history.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is historic. Absolutely.
So and I guess what struck me about this is the fact that there is a man and a God in the same
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah, so the idea here is, and this is where you'll see it happen in Egypt too, where the leader would be elevated to God's status. He'd be deified, made a deity.
Because that's some imagination there then, right? I mean.
Oh, yeah.
I say that word, but I don't know how else to describe because if this is not somebody who exists,
Mm-hmm.
why would you draw a picture with him? That'd be like saying my imaginary friend. I mean, am I thinking about this the wrong way? Or
You're thinking about it the way a rational human being would think about it. These are pagans. These are idolaters. These are descendants of Noah who have turned away from the one true God. Ham was worshipped as Hamish, the sun god, Shamash. Asher, there's actually a connection going back to Nimrod.
And that person holding the person's hand has got horns.
That's what I was saying. It's like horns.
Like,
Yeah.
Like devils.
like a devil.
Well, more like the cow worship and the bull worship.
Okay.
And also there's you see the crest behind it, there's also the moon worship. Yeah. Cow jumped over the moon, that actually goes back to this whole pagan
So
stuff.
are those two supposed to be like close friends or something, the two that are holding hands?
No, that is like the priest as the intercessor
Yeah, okay.
presenting
So it
the
could be a headpiece.
yeah. So this is,
I don't know why that just struck me. It just kind of.
so here's Charles III. Here is the Church of England. And here's the God they think is paying attention. Any questions? But that's pretty much what's changed.
Because that's how the monarchy is.
Mm-hmm.
looked at.
There we go.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's Sargon I, possibly king of the old kingdom of Assyria at this point in time in the north.
Mhm.
We've got in the south, we've got Bursin of Ison, and here's his that we've seen before. Somewhat similar.
That's the same kind of thing.
Yeah. And here's another form of the writing, was on the other one too, cuneiform, which is where we take these clay tablets, we take this pen-like thing that's kind of a stylus and it's wedge-shaped, and we turn the clay thing in our hands, and while it's wet, go and make all sorts of sticky marks with it. So that's where we get this form of writing called cuneiform. It's still not an alphabet, but it's different symbols that convey meaning. And so while cuneiform took hold in Mesopotamia, it was the hieroglyphs that took form in Egypt. In Egypt, they could actually have pens from the marsh reeds and all that stuff and write, where here they had the clay and the dirt. And so they didn't have the rocks to put the carved hieroglyphs into. They just had the clay to work with. And so in the swampy areas. Yeah. We'll see when we get there, we actually have what are called the Amarna letters from this area that we found, where it's correspondence between King Saul, the guy with David and all that stuff, correspondence between King Saul and the Pharaoh of Egypt. And exciting stuff we see in there when we get to that. So we've got that guy, Bursin and Ison, and a little further south in Larsa, we have King Samuel. So Assyria's a little to the north, Ison's a little further south, and then Larsa's further south than that. And we've, of course, got the new kingdom of Babylon, just a little in between all that. Babylon is right over here. Again, these are very early days. So you've got Assyria up here. You've got Ison here, Larsa here. The water was further north at the time. It's since receded south in the Persian Gulf here. And over here, you've got ancient Babylon. Their first king, Samuel. So in 1661 BC, with all of this happening, if Esau's still alive, he's as old as his twin brother Jacob, who's now 130, as he told Pharaoh in Genesis 47. Judah, about 43 years old. Joseph, about 40 years old. Judah's son Perez, about 13. His son Perez has been newly born and come down with them. And that's best estimates on that stuff. So let's pick up in Genesis 47, verse 13. Genesis 47, 13. Now everyone's settled and established, but we still have 5 years of famine to go. Genesis 47:13. Now there was no food in all the land because the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in payment for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was all spent in the land of Canaan and in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph, saying, "Give us food, for why should we die in your presence? For our money is gone." Then Joseph said, "Give up your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys, and he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. So when the dollar collapses, we're going back to the barter system. So money runs out, and so they say, take our stuff, take our animals, we need food. And so that trade happens. So Joseph accumulates for Pharaoh all the money, all the coinage, they didn't have coins back then, it was weights of silver and gold and all that stuff. So he takes all their money, then he takes all their property, the farm animals and all that stuff. And that's in this next year of the famine. So Pharaoh's increasing in power and the locals are decreasing in power, as you see here. So this brings us to the next year, 1660. We finally move forward to 1660 BC. Woo! So what happens in 1660 BC? We have a new little mini city-state kingdom. This one's up a little further on the coast of the Mediterranean, a place called Byblos. Which is right here. So we've got the promised land all down here. There's Jerusalem, Bethel, and all that. We've got Haran up here where Abraham came down from, where Jacob went back to get his bride and all that stuff. And so here's all the promised land. There's Turkey and Cyprus, and then Greece is off to the side there. And so here is Byblos right next to Beirut. So this is modern day Lebanon. Back in the day, it would be the nation of Phoenicia, where Jezebel came from and all that stuff. So Byblos now gets itself established. So let's take a look at something besides rocks and dirt. A lot of these pictures are very similar. So yeah, this is Byblos on the Mediterranean coast in what is now Lebanon, what used to be Phoenicia.
So it's probably very humid there, huh?
Yep.
Hot,
Yeah,
because, yeah, very pretty, but it's pretty.
yeah. And Phoenicia traces back to Bahrain. There are a couple ancient cities on Bahrain that those names came over. It's called a toponym transfer or name transfer, just like York from England, now New York in America. Yeah. Apparently the fishing's really good there. Right, right. And so in Byblos, we've got a new king named Abishemu. First king.
This is Lebanon.
This is Lebanon today.
Is there tourism there as well?
Oh, yeah. Now, but keep in mind, Lebanon is where you've got groups like Hezbollah.
That's what I was, that's
Yeah.
where all the terrorists are, right?
Sponsored by Iran, yes. So that is Byblos, and there's a trash can. So that is Byblos with their king Abishemu. Let's see, Abishemu. Yeah,
Right, cut off.
exactly. I bet they don't have that law where if it's under $1,000, you can right. So this guy, Abishemu of Byblos, we have from this guy, what do we have? This, we have what's called an obelisk. And so this is in the National Museum of Beirut now. It's got the writing on it. In fact, I think the next picture is a zoom in. Still kind of hard to see, but that's from this time of this first king of Byblos. Yeah.
You might not have the answer to this, but during this time, genetically, how different were they? I mean, obviously, like I say, one human race, but are we starting to see the DNAs settle and characteristics come out? I know we're seeing it in their writings and their different styles, the architecture. and
Culture.
stuff, culture. So is that developing at this time? Is the DNA,
Absolutely.
like I say, everything's kind of settling to where people can now trace their ancestors back to?
Absolutely. This is great question. So how diverse are the people groups in their DNA and features now to where we can identify them as different groups? We are able to go back and recognize today, as we are looking back at the skeletons from the 1600s BC in Egypt, we recognize these are not Egyptian skeletons. These are Hebrew Canaanite skeletons. And we're able to tell even from how they're depicted in their art. We see, wait a minute, that's not a drawing of an Egyptian. That's a drawing of a Hebrew. That's a drawing of someone from Canaan. Yeah. So we'll get to this when we get to after the passing of Jacob, when we get to Joseph's final days and all that stuff. We'll definitely see some things that mark and show, wait a minute, there's someone different here.
Because just like when we did our, DNA dealing.
Yeah.
And I understand, like I say, how it kind of works, but like with my English ancestors and Alyssa's Irish ancestors, well, England and Ireland are right there.
Mhm.
But yet there's enough to where they can pinpoint the town that Alyssa's relatives live in, but they can't do that with mine. It's just I'm just got that English part of, so that's a high concentration of something, right?
Yeah, and that is based on the information that is currently available.
Right, because it does change.
Exactly. More people who submit, the more the information they have to pull together and see.
And stuff, just,
Yeah.
it's all over the place.
So we see that these folks from Phoenicia, they trace back to Bahrain, which is one of the center launching points. As they were sailing, Noah did not build the first boat. They were sailing to Africa before the flood. And so we have the records and we can see the history beneath the flood layers of this interaction. In fact, we've got a whole layer of pottery that's called Ubaid pottery that's pre-flood. They've got the flood level where there's nothing. They've got society again after it. And so we see those things happening. But as far as the DNA and all that stuff goes, and the physical attributes and the ethnic traits, as remember, the Tower of Babel, 2552 BC, we're now 1660 BC. So we're talking 900 years. As they've been dispersed across the lands according to their languages, because they stayed with the groups they could talk to when those languages came out. So as they spread out to the different areas across the globe, they were not only isolated culturally from the others and what they did over there, they didn't know about over here, but also genetically, they were isolated. I mean, they didn't have the benefit or the what's the word I'm looking for? The problems, they didn't have the benefits or the problems of other people's DNA. And so that's why it's a good thing to have mixings that aren't so similar. It's why there are a lot of birth defects the closer you are in relation, because you don't have the benefit of someone else's genes offsetting your negatives. And so we definitely see by this point in time, 900 years after the Tower of Babel dispersion, we definitely see the genetic bottlenecks of geographical isolation.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's why you see a lot of diseases and afflictions
Mhm.
within certain groups, because.
Why is sickle cell anemia a thing with African Americans?
Exactly, there's not a diversity.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. And these are general traits. Every individual is an individual, but these are observations that can be observed.
Well, and I would just say that's why family history is so important.
Yes.
At least to me. Because Alyssa and I were talking about it this morning, when I told you I found those ancestors, Eric and I went out on our trip, we went out to one of the cemeteries out in Selma where there's some Confederate and Union guys' grave buried there. And so I was talking to Alyssa about it, and Alyssa was like, and I was doing some research on them, and I was finding out that one of the gentlemen in my bloodline, he was killed at one of the battles. His son was 8 years old. So this was my third great grandfather and my second great grandfather. And I said, Linda, that makes it so real when you realize that this was my grandmother's father or my great grandmother's father, you know, and these are family stories that I've never encountered before. It was never passed down, you know, and I said, Alyssa, you know, some families, they record this stuff and they write it down and they pass it down and pass it down. But in my case, you know, I got nothing, right? I'm having to do all the stuff, you know, but thinking about that, and he's actually buried at the Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. He was killed in the Battle of Petersburg. So I'd like to go out and see that because here's my third great grandfather in, you know, right there in Richmond, Virginia, you know, and I said it makes it so much more real and relatable. And you know, some people they don't care. My grandma didn't want to talk about nothing. She didn't, and there are some people that are like that. They live right here, right now, and the past is the past. But not everybody is like that, and we want to know these family stories. So that's why this is fascinating. And we're basically trying to reconstruct that, right? I mean,
Exactly.
trying to figure out where we came
That's the
from.
difference between the words history and past. The
Yeah.
past is what happened. History is our trying to figure out the past.
Yeah. And so, and then to see God's hand in this, I mean, directly.
Like I said, this is game changer stuff with
Yeah, it
Joseph in
is,
Egypt,
yeah.
game changer for the secular world,
Yeah, it is.
as well as Bible folks. Yeah. Sister Minnie.
Until we had this class with you, I did not realize that we were descended from the Israelites.
We're not.
No.
Wait, you said the Israelites came to England and that area first and then made their way over here.
They did, but so did the non-Israelites.
Ha, I see.
So there are definitely Israel people today in America who come from the Israelites back in the day. All of us came from Noah, and then all of us were dispersed, you know, through the Tower of Babel and to our different places.
Like I was telling Eric, though, if you go far back, you'd be surprised. At the UDC convention, we have a little app. It's on Family Search, and if you put your, you know, if you've done your ancestry, if you turn on the app and it will scan everybody else who has the app on, and it'll show you who you're related to. And so we all sat there at the convention and we had this on, and every single one of us was connected to each other, some in this group, some in that group, and it was going all the way back to like 10 generations ago. So it's really interesting, you know, I found that I had cousins, and like Marianne and I were third cousins, but then I had a lot of ladies I was ninth cousins, 10th cousins with. And we just thought that was the new thing, right? Yeah, we were just, you know, we call each other cousin and all that stuff. So if you go far back enough, you know, we all might have relatives in common. You know, we could be cousins, you know, we just have to do the family trip.
You betcha. Pretty much all of us in this room are familiar with George Burns. I mentioned this a while back at the time. I came across this. There was a video class that was taught by someone who used to be the bass player for the Bengals, but when they were in college together. But anyway, she now became a teacher of archaeology. So I'm looking at this online class, and she makes this observation as far as how we think about these things. There was an Irish poet, and I forget his name offhand, but she mentioned him. In the early part of his life, he shared the planet, was alive at the same time as George Washington. Later in his life, he was alive and shared the planet. This guy, this Irish poet, shared the planet, was alive at the same time George Washington was, early in his life. Later in his life, he was alive and shared the planet with George Burns. So one guy shared the planet with George Washington and George Burns. He was alive for both of them.
How is that?
And your point is.
My point is, things aren't as far removed as we think.
Oh, this is true. Well, just like I said with my ancestors that we were looking at, you know, I remember my nanny's mom. I remember my great grandmother, and then to think that her father lost his father when he was 8 years old in the Civil War. That's close, you know, I mean, we think of it as, but that was close. You know, and that affected the whole, you know, the whole family dynamic. So when was George Burns born?
In the 1800s.
Okay.
Yeah.
There could be more than one George
Well,
Burns.
it's-
No, but it was this George Burns.
He was born for Washington.
Exactly. But that's the point. Things aren't as far removed as we think of them in our brains. So closing up for the year 1660, we'll read on in Genesis 47 here in a sec, but one other important event happens in this year. And that is the death of Pharaoh Senuseret III. So Junior is left alone to rule. So here is the pyramid of Pharaoh Senuseret III, which pretty much looks like a mound of dirt now. Lots of these pyramids did at one time look like pyramids. And even the pyramids we see at Giza didn't look like they do now. They were smooth.
It looks like really soft skin.
Yeah. So here's, let me go back here. So there it is now. That's what was underneath. But it used to be the smooth pyramid, because right now we look at the pyramids, we see with the layers of stone. It used to have smooth outer casing, limestone or whatever, and it gleamed. Yeah, it kind of looks like an anthill now. So Senuseret III dies in 1660 BC. So his son Amenemhat III is now ruling alone. And you have to take with a grain of salt some of the pictures you see and be able to tell, okay, they put the wrong picture there. And yep. Boats in the dirt. Yeah.
These
So
are uploaded by just users.
yeah,
right?
exactly. So that's a pretty good shot of it. So that's the pyramid of Senuseret III. So keep in mind that we talked about the flooding of the Nile causing first the years of plenty and also then causing the years of famine because it was too high. So in the second year of the high floods, when the famine was at its hardest, Senuseret III dies, 39th year of his reign. So Amenemhat III now continues on without the support of his father. So obviously he relies on Joseph even more now as these years continue. They continue on into the famine, which brings us to Genesis 47:18. We'll close out here. Genesis 47, verse 18. When that year ended, so now we're in 1660 BC, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord the fact that our money is all spent. The livestock are my lord's. There's nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he relocated them to the cities from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy because the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh. They lived off the allotment which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Behold, today I have purchased you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you may sow the land. At the harvest, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own for seed of the field and for your food and for those of your households and as food for your little ones." So they said, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my lord, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves." Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, valid to this day, that Pharaoh was to have the fifth, only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. So now Jacob's 131, and so is Esau, if he's still around. Judah's 44, Joseph's 41, Perez is 14, Hezron is 1, when this takes place in the next year of the famine. So now they've paid off they've given all their money, they've given all their cattle and farm animals. Now they're giving their land and even themselves into labor so that they can be fed and survive. And so Joseph says, okay, here's what you can do. You can keep your money. We're going to tax you 20%, 1/5. That'll be the tax, but you keep your 80% and live off of that. Plant your seed, grow, going to kind of rearrange and resettle things. And here's how we're going to revive and survive and outlast.
The land's not theirs anymore.
Exactly. And so they're renting the land, the taxes they're renting, the sharecroppers.
That's not a good thing, though.
It's better than famine.
Okay.
Fine.
Better than famine.
Yeah, but.
Yeah. In fact, that's what they say. You've saved our lives. And so, and all this is, God's got a bigger picture too. He's building all this into. So that's where we will end for now. We will pick up next week with the fall of the Xia dynasty, which will be replaced by a new guy in a new dynasty. We'll have Emperor Tang of Shang, which is just fun to say. But we'll get to that all next week. Tang of Shang. So, yeah, Tang of Shang. So that's where we'll pick up next week. And so with that, we'll go ahead and stop our share, stop our recording. And thank you very much for your contributions and conversation.
Sorry,